we were constantly amazed as we went through the legislative process that we were actually winning. We were getting what we wanted. We had a strategy. We were very worried that we would get somebody would come in and take over the whole thing, and we would lose the CDFI fund in some way or another. But suddenly it was done, and there was a big holdup before that in the Senate. Most of the fighting over what the legislation would be like and the language of the legislation had happened really in the writing of it a couple of years before, because nobody wanted to go against the president to change how the CDFI fund was going to work, because they didn't understand how CDFIs work. So there wasn't a lot of political fighting around that. There was political fighting in other parts of the bill. So the bill got passed. We were all relieved. That was remarkable. So then suddenly we had to think about something we never thought we would have to think about, which was a bill signing. I think they scheduled it for 10 days out or something from the day the conference committee, reconciled the two versions of the bill. And I kept reaching out to the White House and sort of saying, like, what's the plan? What's the plan? What's the plan? They said, oh, we'll get back to you. We'll get back to you. We'll get back to you. And one night at about 10 o'clock at night, I get a call from the White House saying, we're going to plan the bill signing tomorrow. We got everybody organized. Can you be here at 11 o'clock or whatever it was? I said, of course. So I get to the executive office building, walk into this big room with about 30 or 40 people. And these are some famous people. These are people you'd see on TV for the Clinton administration. And we're sitting there and it's 11 o'clock and, meeting's not starting. And I'm looking around at, the people who invited me, and 11:05, 11:10, it's not starting. I turned to the Paul Weinstein, who was the head of domestic policy at the White House then, and say, shouldn't we get started? And they said, yeah, you ready? It's your meeting. And I thought, what? What do you mean it's my meeting? And so they had some ideas, but they wanted to hear what CDFI Industry wanted to do. And we had a date, we had a time. And one of the big questions was President Clinton had gotten really invested in Reggie White, who was a professional football player, speaking at this event, because Reggie White had sort of really spoken up for CDFIs and was trying to support them in some ways. This is what it turned out had been holding this up for a week, was they didn't know whether, as they said, the football player was going to make it or not. And so finally someone spoke up and said, no, we got final word, the football player can't make it. So then we had to have something else that was exciting. So I threw out the idea of getting, we try to get 100 CDFI borrowers to the bill signing. President could then call them out, have them stand up. It would be a great dramatic sort of moment. Of course, they had no money to pay for it. We had to figure out how to make that happen. And at that point, we had like 3 days. After the meeting, I immediately had to send out word to the CDFIs. We didn't have blast emails and things then. So I had to get back to my office and send a fax out to all our CDFIs saying, let me know if you can bring folks. There's no money to pay for it. And we got well over 100 borrowers who came ultimately on that day. So the bill signing was scheduled to be on the south lawn of the White House. And we get notice the day before that we're getting moved. We can't be on the south lawn of the White House because there's a danger of it raining. And they were supposed to have a reception with jazz music that night where people are going to be dancing. They didn't want to mess up the lawn. So they moved us to the Department of Agriculture in a room that was much smaller. And so they had me get there really early. So the first thing they do when I get there, at this point, I'm the director of the CDFI Coalition. And so they immediately put a Secret Service pin on me, meaning I don't have to leave the room when they clear the room. They clear the room. We're setting up for the 100 borrowers and making sure the space is there. And I go out and give instructions to the CDFIs to tell them where these people are supposed to be. These people were thrilled. They were people who didn't even know if they could qualify for a loan, and now they're going to be in a room being cited by the President of the United States. And so then I go back in, and the Secret Service is doing its crawling under chairs. It was kind of crazy. I don't know what I'm doing there. We get everybody in. We get the borrowers in. They're all there. They're thrilled. They're excited. They're hyped up. The program begins. Turns out that they couldn't get the football player, Reggie White, who was playing in Green Bay at the time. But the weekend before, Richard Dent, who was another big name football player, played for the Chicago Bears, had blown out his knee. So they brought him in instead. So they had a football player there in crutches. The president then comes. Dave Lawless does a beautiful job of introducing him.
Families who need and deserve new homes, people who want to start or expand a business, mothers and fathers who want the basic necessities for their kids need a financial institution that they can help lead and over which they have some ownership. Thank you, Mr. President.
this is unreal that this is happening. And the president comes in, and the first thing he does is give an update on something, maybe about China, something about the economy. And immediately, the headline from this event was not going to be about CDFIs, it was going to be about the economy. And so we all knew that, but we were having a good time. When it comes time for President Clinton to cite the borrowers, what does he do? He cites the football player. And he never mentions the borrowers after all of this. It's in his script. Oh, they had me writing the script. So I had written the speech. And so, there was language in there and everything. But
Richard Dent, the all-pro defensive player for the Bears. I think Richard's here today. But he's injured, so he can't stand up. Can you?
The poor borrowers don't get mentioned. Fortunately, they were so enthralled that they didn't, in the end, they weren't upset. But it was an extraordinary moment of this impossible thing that just 2 years earlier we didn't even dream of getting enacted in a way that was unique to what CDFIs are and how unique to what CDFIs would become, and that really changed the CDFI sort of universe. And we were all sort of pinching ourselves at that point. I can remember sitting in the chairs on the White House lawn, getting ready for the introduction of the CDFI Act in July of 1993, thinking, we knew what was in the legislation because they had consulted with us about it, but thinking this might be the best moment. It might all be downhill from here. Politicians may take pieces of it. Things may happen to it. It might get corrupted in some way. And we didn't know what was going to come out at that point. So I remember taking that moment, just sitting there thinking, if nothing comes of this, we've had this moment, right? We've gotten this recognition, which we never expected. It was a different time then. It was not a time when you expected the White House to know what a CDFI was, or anybody in Washington. And suddenly, everybody in Washington knew what CDFIs were. It was a pet project of President Clinton's, and whatever it is, 30 years later, we're still holding on, and things are, the CDFI Fund continues to be this sort of remarkable federal program, unlike any other.